everybody, and welcome back to another video from Northeast Christian Apologetics. My name's Simon Williams, and today we are continuing our reading of Christian Apologetics by Douglas Groothuis. Just as a reminder, you can get this book at Amazon.com as well as ChristianBooks.com. Highly recommend you get in this book. This is a great book to have on your shelf as a resource as well as a reference book. There has been many times in which I have referred back to this book while having conversations with people or writing things or just for my own edification and learning stuff. Very useful book. So this chapter 5, corresponds to session 6 of the Apologetics 101 series if you're out here in Connecticut, as well as session 7. So you are knocking out 2 sessions with 1 chapter here. Very important stuff, truth, defining truth, what is truth, and defending it. When we form the belief that the truth is actually out there and exists, what should we do? What's the proper behavior to have? These are the kinds of things that we're going to be exploring here. If you haven't already done so, please consider subscribing to the channel. And without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into chapter 5. What is truth? Said jesting Pilate, and would not stay for an answer. Francis Bacon. If apologetics finds its meaning and mission in defending the truth of Christianity rationally, it must take pause when the historic Christian view of truth itself is brought into question or rejected outright. In 1968, Francis Schaeffer wrote that the problem with communicating Christianity to a new generation was centered on a new view of truth that detached it from objective and knowable reality. Schaeffer was prophetic, and the dangers he discerned then are epidemic now. Truth, especially spiritual truth, is now widely taken to be a matter of perspective, a mere social or personal construction. Truth no longer concerns the nature of things, nor is it subject to intellectual analysis. In 1943, prophetic novelist and essayist George Orwell wrote that he often had the feeling that the very concept of objective truth is fading out of the world. In 2016, the Oxford Dictionary's word of the year was post-truth, which it described as an adjective defined as relating to or denoting circumstances in which objective facts are less influential in shaping public opinion than appeals to emotion and personal belief. Ironically, the increase in communications technologies often makes the truth harder to find amid the churning seas of false narratives, factoids, sound bites, talking points, and outright lies. And this is just going to become even more difficult as AI progresses. Artificial intelligence is already really powerful, and its ability to make pictures is only going to improve from here, and this is going to include videos as well. It's going to be very difficult to discern reality. All right, so Groothuis continues. To give one example among many, in 2014, the respected Pew organization found that the most trusted news source for liberals was a more or less three-way tie for second place between public television, CNN, and Jon Stewart's Daily Show. Jon Stewart's The Daily Show. The latter show is comedy, not news, and the faux anchor gives mock interviews. Yet Scripture repeatedly affirms that faith must be factual, a matter of truth, and that believing means connecting with reality. Consider Paul's statement to the Corinthians who were disputing the resurrection of the dead. If Christ has not been raised, our preaching is useless, and so is your faith. More than that, we are then found to be false witnesses about God, for we have testified about God that he raised Christ from the dead. But he did not raise him if in fact the dead are not raised. For if the dead are not raised, then Christ has not been raised either. And if Christ has not been raised, your faith is futile. You are still in your sins. Then those also who have fallen asleep in Christ are lost. If only for this life we have hope in Christ, we are of all people most to be pitied. Paul's argument presupposes a truth claim concerning the resurrection of Jesus in space-time history. Paul stakes everything on the objective truth of Jesus' resurrection. His strength in believing it or his community's comfort in affirming it is irrelevant if it is not objectively true. When we were reading through On Guard by Dr. William Lane Craig, he talked about the historical nature of the resurrection and that it's one of the most scandalous things about Christianity. And it really is that we worshipers of the Lord Jesus Christ believe that a miraculous event is centered in actual history. That's not true with the Buddha, Confucius, things like that, or Krishna. These people don't need to be actual historical figures in order for their religion to still be followed. But Christianity relies on Jesus actually being an actual historical figure. And that's significant. Groothuis continues. This chapter defends a concept of truth that is challenged by those who journey down the postmodern road away from objective truth. It is a vision of truth, both ancient and logically compelling. Nevertheless, many evangelicals are brushing it aside with little critical engagement. At worst, some evangelicals seem to abandon or at least marginalize this venerable view of truth simply because many postmodern people are questioning or abandoning it. The truth question. The question of truth has at least two core components. First, what is the nature of truth itself? What does it mean for something, a belief or statement, to be true, as opposed to false or nonsensical? These sorts of questions address the metaphysics or being of truth. Truth claims can be made about pedestrian facts, is it raining out today? Or about ancient and consequential worldviews. Which of the many religions is true, if any of them? Second, since contradictory truth claims greet us on every hand, truth claims need to be rationally tested. This invokes the field of epistemology, or the study of how we know what we know. While this chapter will not address epistemology directly, it is imperative to note that no epistemology works independently of a theory of truth. Therefore, a rational theory of truth is required for a rational and truth-seeking epistemology, whether it is applied to philosophy, theology, or any other discipline. Meaning and truth. Before assessing the four leading theories of truth, a word is in order on the matter of meaning. For a statement to either be true or false, however we understand the concepts truth or falsity, it must be meaningful. That is, it must put forth an understandable truth claim. All right, so let's highlight this as what meaningful means. All right, so it must put forth an understandable truth claim. You need to be able to understand the statement. You need to be able to understand what's being said. You need to be able to understand the words being used and how they're being used. And I'm stressing this right now is because this is very important, especially in conversations with people online. Not everybody uses words exactly the same way. And when you start diving into philosophy like this and theology, the meaning of words matter. If you don't have an agreement with what words mean, then you're going to be talking past the person that you're engaging. Okay, so you need to have an understanding of how they're using a word. Remember when we were in the book Tactics, we learned the Columbo tactic where you're like, what do you mean by that? That's the first Columbo tactic. Wear that question out. Wear that question out. Make sure that you completely understand the person that you're talking with. Okay? All right, so Groothuis continues. It must stake out a share of reality conceptually and be intelligible. For example, the statement, green ideas sleep furiously, is neither true nor false because it doesn't advance any statement about anything. The statement may be grammatical, but it is nonetheless meaningless. The statement, God is 3 in 1, made by Christians, is meaningful. The statement, God is not 3 in 1, made by Muslims, is meaningful. The statement, there is no God, made by atheists, is meaningful. The statement, there are many gods, is meaningful. Of course, these statements cannot all be true. At most, only one of these statements can be true. All right, one thing I'm going to note here is that Dr. Groothuis is saying that there is no God made by atheists. You're going to meet a lot of atheists today who will call themselves atheists, but will not commit to a statement like this, that there is no God. Okay, that's too strong of a statement for them. They often say that they just bear a lack of belief regarding the existence of God or God. So they just have a lack of belief. It's not that they believe that God doesn't exist. It's just, well, at least that's the claim. But they'll say that they just have a lack of belief. And in so doing, they think that they are avoiding having to bear any responsibility for justifying their position. But that's not true, okay? Even if you have a lack of belief regarding something, you still need to be able to justify that. It's like, why do you have a lack of belief in the existence of God? It would be the same as somebody saying, I have a lack of belief that the earth is round. It'd be like, so why do you lack belief in it? What's your justification for doubting the nature of the earth being a globe? So just because you have a lack of belief in something doesn't mean that you're off the hook. You need to still justify your doubts. Skepticism needs to be justified, especially with regard to beliefs that are commonly held. And God, the belief in God or a higher power or something that's like the Christian God is vastly more common than a lack of belief of any variety of that lack of belief in the existence of a God. So that needs to be justified. Okay. All right. So Groothuis continues, of course, so one must correctly interpret the meaning of any given statement if that statement's truth claim is to be discerned and addressed. The refutation of a misinterpreted statement leaves the truth or falsity of that statement untouched. This holds true for entire worldviews as well. Many have misinterpreted the meaning of certain aspects of Christianity and so have attributed it claims of wrongdoing for which it is not guilty. By failing to discern the meaning of Christianity's claims, some have thus rejected it unfairly. In fact, any worldview that is caricatured and then criticized on that basis has not been fairly interrogated. Let's highlight this. Okay? Very important. All right? I'm going to say this one as well.
Well said.
Whenever you do worldview analysis, you need to make sure that you have the best understanding of that worldview. You need to analyze it fairly. You do not want to set up a straw man and then knock it down. Remember, worldview analysis is incredibly important. Okay, so make sure you're doing justice to the worldviews. And when we were I believe that we talked about this in On Guard, but when you analyze a worldview in this manner, where you analyze its claims and its evidences as thoroughly and as honestly as possible, you are showing that worldview respect, even if you end up rejecting that worldview. Because as a reminder, you must reject worldviews. Any worldview that you hold, you can only ever hold one worldview at a time. And when you hold a worldview, that means that you're rejecting other worldviews. And that's why you have to ask the question, why should I prefer my worldview over a competing worldview? So even though you reject other worldviews, when you analyze them in this manner, what Dr. Groothuis has said here, you are still showing that worldview respect, even though you reject it. Okay? This is very important stuff. All right, so Groothuis continues, the correspondence theory of truth. Although it can become quite technical in some of its details, the correspondence view of truth, often referred to as realism, is commonsensical and employed at least implicitly by anyone who affirms something about reality. Aristotle got the heart of the matter centuries ago. To say of what is that it is not, or of what is not that it is false. While to say what is that it is, and what is not that it is not, is true. So that he who says anything that it is or that it is not will say either what is true or what is false. Okay, so if it is and you say that it is, that's true. If it is not and you say that it is not, that's true. If it is and you say that it is not, that's false. Okay, if it is not and you say that it is, false. Okay, philosophy has a way of making things more difficult than they are, but and that's what you're going to have to learn as well. Philosophy has a way of making things complicated, simple things complicated. It makes simple things complicated. All right, but let's continue. A belief or statement is true only if it matches with, reflects, or corresponds to the reality it refers to. When you say that it's raining outside, it needs to correspond to reality. It needs to be raining outside in order for it to be true. Okay, for that statement to be true. All right, so Groothuis continues, for a statement to be true, it must be factual. Facts determine the truth or falsity of a belief or a statement. It is the nature and meaning of truth to be fact-dependent. In other words, for a statement to be true, there must be a truth maker that determines its truth. All right, so this is kind of where I diverge from Groothuis here. He's talking about facts, and the difficult thing about facts is that I personally think facts are what are commonly believed by people to be true. Okay, and there have been many facts in the past where people have thought certain statements were true when in fact they were not. Like the Earth being flat was a fact, right? You know, the Earth, the sun orbiting the Earth was a fact, right? Well, no, it's not. It wasn't true. So even though we considered it to be a fact, that doesn't mean that it was true. Okay, so this is kind of where I diverge from Groothuis here. I kind of just think of truth as that which corresponds with reality. You know, reality is the way that it is, and truth is only truth if it corresponds to it. You know, so but anyway, it's kind of a quibble, and I don't really I don't stress on that very much, but it does come up in certain aspects. On my end, it comes up in discussions of morality, which we might get into later. All right, so Groothuis continues. A statement is never true simply because someone thinks it or utters it. We may be entitled to our own opinions, but we are not entitled to our own facts. Believing a statement is one thing. That statement of being true is another. In this sense, truth is an achievement. Not all truth candidates are elected by reality. Some are defeated. Not all statements hit their targets. Some are off the mark. For epistemologist Alvin Goldman, the relationship of beliefs to truth is like betting on a horse race. Whether we bet or not what horse we bet is up to us. Who wins the race is not up to us. Once you form a belief, its success or failure is not up to you. That is up to the world, which in general is independent of you. In other words, only the world, i.e. reality itself, confers truth and falsity. All right, so this is kind of my point of view. All right. A true statement, then, is a descriptive success, which means that it is faithful to reality. All right, let's highlight this. A true statement, then, is a descriptive success, which means that it is faithful to reality. All right, that's what a true statement is. All right. Groothuis continues, another way of explaining this is that truth claims are intentional. This means that they are about something or pertain to something. They are directed at a state of affairs. And if they are, they capture that state of affairs conceptually. All right, so a state of affairs is just like a description of how reality actually is. It's kind of like a true statement, but it is how reality is. Okay, that's what a state of affairs is. It's how reality is. Sometimes state of affairs can refer to things that aren't actual. You know, when you talk about possible worlds, any description of a possible world, like, for example, if I wasn't wearing this sweater, I was just wearing a t-shirt or something. That's a description of a possible reality, which would be a state of affairs. The state of affairs would be in that possible world I wasn't wearing a sweater. Okay, that's what state of affairs refers to. All right, so Groothuis continues, God exists is a statement about God's being there as opposed to being absent. God, then, is the intentional object of the intentional statement, God exists. If a statement fails to find its intentional object, it is false. An example is Albert Gore won the 2000 U.S. presidential election. Matters become trickier when we speak of the truth or falsity of statements made in the future tense. That is, when we make predictions about things that do not yet exist. This is not abstruse metaphysics with no purchase on the present. We want and need to know if certain promises are true, particularly those relating to cosmic history and personal immortality. In these cases, we can't claim that the statement Jesus will come again is true on the basis that it now corresponds to a present or past objective event, since the event of the second coming is future. This differs from the statement Jesus lived in ancient Palestine, since that is a past event and objective history. Yet in the case of the second coming, the claim is meaningful. It stipulates intelligible states of affairs, and it is certainly true that either Jesus will come back or he will not. Only one of these antithetical realities will happen. So the statement is not exempt from the condition of being either true or false. All right, so this is a common objection to the correspondence theory of truth. Statements that are like future tense statements or predictions, or also counterfactuals. These kinds of things try to undermine the validity of the correspondence theory of truth. And there's certain metaphysical models that you can adopt in order to overcome these, I personally think. But I think that's beyond the scope of this part of the book. So we'll just keep going. If you have a question on that matter, feel free to leave them in the comments, okay? And I will address them as best I can. All right, so Groothuis continues, the particular truth value of the statement that Jesus will come again, it is still based on its correspondence to God's perfect knowledge and infallible plan for the world. Moreover, according to the Christian worldview, the predictive statement will, at some unknown time in the future, correspond to the actual event of the second coming by being fulfilled in history. All right, well, the statement can't be true when it's fulfilled, because then the statement is, since it's worded as a future tense with a future tense, and when the second coming happens, it's in the present tense. So the statement changes. It becomes false, so you got to pay attention to the tenses of words. All right. And this becomes a debate on A theory of time versus B theory of time, and tenses and how they relate, and how truth can be ascertained with different theories of time. So it becomes very complicated. Again, I think that's beyond the scope of this discussion, so we'll just keep going. So Groothuis continues, the truth of moral and logical principles does not correspond to reality in the same way as do statements about observable empirical facts. The law of non-contradiction is true, not because it corresponds to any one slice of reality, but because it corresponds to all of reality. The fact that nothing can be itself and not itself in the same way and in the same respect, A is not non-A, is a universal condition or requirement of existence. It is true at all times and at all places, and must be so. It is a necessary truth. It cannot be false. And these are the kinds of things that you get with mathematical structures as well. Like, if you understand what the word one means, and what the word two means, and what the word plus means, and what the word three means and equals means, all that stuff, they're well defined. And you say 1 + 2 = 3. That's true in every possible world. So mathematical formulas are true in every possible world. All right. Groothuis continues, further, the truth of the law of non-contradiction corresponds to the workings of God's mind. God is a God of truth and not of falsehood. God does not contradict himself and cannot deny himself. He knows all things truly and knows that neither his being nor his creation can contain logical contradictions. Moral statements are also true because they match reality. The statement adultery is wrong is true because the statement corresponds to the objective, universal, and absolute moral law revealed by God, which is in accordance with his eternally stable character and the character of his creation. Okay, so this is very important too, and we're going to be talking about this more when we talk about the moral argument and the moral landscape. All right. It therefore applies to all of reality, to all marriages. We don't verify the wrongfulness of murder in the same way we verify an individual fact of history. Nonetheless, meaningful statements about morality are true or false, depending on whether they match the moral law. Another way that the truth of moral statements obtains is that they correspond not only to the moral law, but to objective states of value. That is, acts of adultery have the objective moral property of wrongness because they violate the moral law whenever they occur. On the other hand, acts and attitudes of love in marriage and in other divinely sanctioned relationships have the moral value of being good because they conform to the moral law whenever they occur. Truth, then, is an exclusive property that is not shared with all assertions. But what exactly possesses this property of truthfulness? What is the truth bearer? The truth bearer must be a unit of conceptual meaning. To grasp this, we need to distinguish sentences from propositions. Okay, this is what I talked about previously in other chapters, so let's go ahead and highlight this. All right. What is a truth bearer? A truth bearer must be a unit of conceptual meaning. To grasp this, we need to distinguish sentences from propositions. All right. A sentence may be written, spoken, or thought in the mind without an external linguistic indicator. Declarative sentences, unlike questions or commands, stake claims on reality that by stipulating that such and such is the case. A proposition is what a declarative sentence asserts. That is what it means. All right, so this is the definition of a proposition. I highly recommend you highlight this. All right, a proposition is what a declarative sentence asserts. That is what it means. All right, so like I said, a declarative statement would be like a tree leaves are green. You know, it's only true if I'm referring to some tree leaves that are green. Okay. So Groothuis continues, different sentences in the same language may have the same propositional content, such as Jesus is the Lord and the Lord is Jesus. Okay. So you can say things differently. So you can have different sentences, but have the same propositional content. All right. If a sentence is translated faithfully from one language to another, say from the New Testament Greek to English translation, both sentences mean the same thing. That is, they assert the same proposition. Language cannot get on without propositions, since so much of language involves targeting facts with words. All right. The biblical view of truth. The Bible does not set forth a technical view of truth, but it does implicitly and consistently advance the correspondence view in both testaments. If the Bible had presented its own unique idiosyncratic view of the basic nature of truth, one not generally shared by other worldviews, this would insulate and isolate the Bible from any assessment of its truth claims by outsiders, thus making apologetics impossible. Further, if Scripture had offered only a particular Christian account of the basic meaning of truth, Christianity would be true by definition, but only in a trivial sense. Any other worldview could also claim its own view of truth and be so exempt from criticism. The Hebrew and Greek words for truth are rich in meaning, but have at their core the idea of conformity to fact. Scripture also emphasizes that God is true to his truth, meaning that he is faithful and will not lie. God is a God of truth, whose word is truth. The Holy Spirit is a spirit of truth, and so will teach us true things. Jesus, the Son of God, is full of grace and truth, and declared himself to be the way, the truth, and the life, and that no one can come to the Father apart from him. The prophets, Jesus, and the apostles warn of those who pervert the truth of God through errors and lies. Hence, all of Scripture puts God's revealed objective truth at the solid center of spiritual and ethical life and faithfulness. God's truth must be learned, meditated on, and defended. Error must be addressed in love, whether it is a theological or moral, and whether it concerns the false beliefs of unbelievers or the false beliefs of errant Christians. All right, so we should definitely highlight this. I'm going to highlight this whole thing. All right. Highly recommend you highlight it. I'm going to highlight it yellow. All right. So truth is very important. It's a very important concept in the Bible. All right. And we need to be able to learn from it. You know, God's truth must be learned, and it needs to be meditated on, and it needs to be defended. Error must be addressed in love. Okay. It is not an evil thing to learn what the truth is and then to explain what the truth is to other people and to hold people accountable. That is morality. Morality is all about that. Okay. Learning what the truth is and holding people accountable to it. You know, justice. Very important. Very important. So Groothuis continues, versions of the correspondence view of truth have been held by the majority of ancient philosophers, Plato, Aristotle, medieval philosophers, Augustine, Anselm, Aquinas, modern philosophers, Descartes, Locke, Hume, Leibniz, Russell, and contemporary philosophers, John Searle, William Alston, Alvin Goldman, and Thomas Nagel. Nevertheless, two other theories of truth deserve some attention, postmodernist and coherence. Does truth exist? Postmodernist challenges. Is all this protracted musing on the nature of truth just pretentious philosophizing that is out of touch with contemporary realities? This is the kind of question everyone asks. Is the imperious and singular truth something we should shed in favor of opening up the field to many truths? The case against the correspondence view of truth, as it has been explained previously, is an ancient one. The ancient philosopher Protagoras claimed that man is the measure of all things, instead of being measured by them. Whoa. That is crazy. Socrates, of course, didn't take this lying down. Instead, as related in Plato's Theaetetus, he quickly dismantled the claim by asking Protagoras a series of philosophically embarrassing questions. Protagoras was a teacher, but who has anything to learn from an authority if we determine truth and falsity by mere opinion? Moreover, does not Protagoras disagree with those who deny his proposition? But how can he? Man is the measure of all things means that each man is his own measure, and there is no measurement apart from each person's measuring. Despite this ancient refutation of Protagoras, the spirit of his thinking has been reincarnated, with a few twists, in a host of postmodernist philosophers, historians, and sociologists of recent decades. In a nutshell, postmodernism holds that truth is not determined by its connection to objective reality, but by various social constructions devised for different purposes. Put another way, various cultures have their own language games, which describe reality very differently. However, we cannot adjudicate which language game or which linguistic map correlates more correctly with reality, since we cannot get beyond our own cultural conditioning. But instead of affirming skepticism, there is an objective reality, but we have no access to it, postmodernists typically affirm that there is no knowable objective reality apart from our languages and concepts. To say we know the objective truth about ultimate issues is to set up a meta-narrative that is intrinsically oppressive and exploitative. Various interpretive communities, Stanley Fish, determine their own truth. Texts, whether religious or otherwise, do not have any fixed objective meaning. Therefore, they are neither true nor false in themselves. Truth is what our colleagues will let us get away with, or what the power structures deem to be so. Finally, there is no God's eye view of anything. Therefore, there is no objective truth. Postmodernist claims come in various forms and should be evaluated individually, but since they all reject the correspondence view of truth, they are all subject to several general criticisms. First, meta-narratives are not oppressive by virtue of being comprehensive truth claims or worldviews. At some level, everyone has a worldview, or a take on how the world is and how it works. These views may or may not be oppressive towards those who do not hold the worldview. That is a question of the intellectual content or truth claims of the worldview in question. You have to like I've been saying, you have to analyze each worldview by its own merits. Okay? The Marxist worldview historically has been very oppressive and unliberating despite propaganda to the contrary. The Wahhabi version of Islam, the ideology of Osama bin Laden and his destructive followers, fueled the atrocities of September 11, 2001, and similar horrors globally. The Christian worldview, while frequently distorted, is not intrinsically oppressive given its ethical incarnation, shalom, love, and justice. Second, postmodernist pronouncements on rejecting objective truth tend to contradict themselves in that they claim to be applicable to reality itself, not merely to their own language game or constructed map. Yet, this is just what postmodernists themselves claim cannot be done. For example, the claim that all meta-narratives are oppressive is itself a meta-narrative or large-scale explanation of reality. Therefore, these kinds of claims are self-refuting and false. Moreover, while deconstructionists of various stripes claim that texts have no fixed and objective meaning, they still object when others misinterpret their own writings. But this presupposes a proper interpretation based on the author's intended meaning, which becomes objective standard by which to judge interpretations. If so, the central postmodernist claim about the endless plasticity of text cannot be true. Third, right-thinking people judge certain acts, such as racism, female genital mutilation, rape, child abuse, the murderous terrorist attacks on America in September 11, 2001, as objectively evil as atrocities and as not merely relative social constructions. If such assessments are correct, then the postmodern view cannot be sustained logically, since in the postmodern account there are no objective moral facts, but only endlessly differing interpretations. As some have unwisely said, one person's terrorist is another person's freedom fighter. This may be so on the descriptive level. There are differing opinions on the moral status of perpetrators of violence, but it makes no objective judgment about the moral status of the persons involved. Fourth, by emphasizing the irresolvable diversity of truth claims, postmodernism provides no reliable criteria to test these claims against reality. Instead, it succumbs to a kind of intellectual indifference. Truth is what you or your culture make it, nothing more. This stance thwarts the fundamental concern for truth discussed so far in this book. Although postmodernists have no objective criteria for which to evaluate truth claims, they nevertheless make objective moral judgments in spite of themselves. And the New York Times editorialized against postmodernism in the wake of the terrorist apocalypse of September 11, 2001. Stanley Fish claimed in an op-ed piece later in the same newspaper that his postmodern view did in fact allow him to make moral judgments against such acts. However, he admitted that he had no objective criteria by which to level such judgments and that none were available. This is basically like what Greg Koukl says in his book about the postmodernist view. It's like, I have an opinion on this. It's a tragedy. It's a horrible, but, like, that's just my opinion, so please ignore me. I don't understand how you can have this stance. This is something that you have to learn, because otherwise you would find certain moral atrocities to be just as they are, moral atrocities. And this postmodern view of truth is also detrimental to science. Like, science is in the business of trying to find truth, explanations. How does reality actually work? And then to make accurate predictions based off of that to empower us to be able to better control our environment, things of that nature. If truth is not discoverable, then you can just throw away science. It's ridiculous. So Groothuis continues, if so, his judgments are nothing more than subjective assertions of value that are posited within an objective value vacuum. Although no major religion adheres to the postmodern view of truth, this frame of mind has affected how many people view religious expression. In nations with religious freedom, especially the United States, the default position for many citizens is that religion is a matter of choice, taste, and preference. Dialoguing about one religion being true or another false is beside the point. All are true in the postmodern sense because they give meaning and direction to people's lives. However, when it comes to certain Muslim beliefs on the duty to die in a jihad against the Western infidels, postmodernist tolerance may begin to crack open. A total relativism concerning religious belief is difficult to sustain. Yes, that's the thing. Are we really supposed to respect the religious cults that believe in human sacrifice or child sacrifice? Are they really supposed to be on the same level as Christianity? No. No. All right, so Groothuis continues. The postmodernist view also bears on the increasing tendency of some contemporary people to create their own religion or spirituality by mixing and matching elements of several religions, however incompatible these may be. Oh man, this is so common. If spiritual truth is a matter of social or individual construction, then one need not be constrained by logical consistency or by adherence to a received tradition, say Buddhist, Jewish, Christian, or Islamic. There is an element of pragmatism here as well. If it works for someone to combine elements of Hinduism, the practice of yoga, and Christianity, church attendance, and the golden rule and prayer, one need not worry about intellectual inconsistency or spiritual fidelity to an ancient tradition or revealed authority. But this smorgasbord approach lacks intellectual integrity because it makes religious belief something to use instead of something to discover and live by. Postmodernity often erodes a religious confidence. What results is a free-floating spirituality largely devoid of certainty or sustained convictions. This is the interesting thing about Christianity and religions in general. Like if God actually exists, then it should not be surprising if he disagrees with you on things. If you find that the God that you worship is never in disagreement with you on matters, then the God that you're worshiping is very likely yourself. Okay? There have been many times in which I am confronted with the God of the Bible. I'm like, man, this seems incorrect to me. All right. But upon deeper study, deeper investigation, more experience, meditation, I find that actually my previous opinion was in error, okay, or misconceived, or just wrong in some way, okay? So, like, this is very important. Do not be deceived into worshiping yourself. All right, Groothuis continues. The sheer number of religious options combined with the intellectual superficiality of much contemporary religious expression encourages a less committed and less thought-out kind of religious believing. This is seen in the shift from religion to spirituality. Religion is deemed too constructed, authoritative, exclusive, and rigid. Spirituality, on the other hand, is more customized, subjective, inclusive, and open to pragmatic experimentation. Sociologist Robert Wolfnow speaks of Americans moving from an orientation of dwelling within an established religious worldview and set of practices to a spirituality of seeking, wherein they negotiate among competing glimpses of the sacred, seeking partial knowledge and practical wisdom. This tentativeness is reflected in our language about spiritual concerns. When someone holds strong convictions of religious matters, he or she will speak of them, or of the most important ones, in terms of knowledge, certainty, and other cognitively strong notions. This is what sociologist Peter Berger calls firm objectivations, which are capable of supporting worldviews and ideas with a firm status of objective reality within the consciousness of their adherents. Yet, when a social consensus that makes religious beliefs plausible break down, religious language also loses its intellectual strength. Instead of knowledge of God, we speak of beliefs, opinions, or feelings instead. Rather than speaking of faith as a way of confident knowing, we speak of the leap of faith, along with religious preference. These kinds of tentative references reveal that what Berger calls the de-objectivation of religious tradition. The de-objectivation indicates a common tendency exhibited by those suffering under the pressures of most modern pluralism. All right, so coherence theories inadequate. Coherence theories of truth argue that what makes a statement or belief true is its coherence or consistency or logically close connection with other beliefs. If my web of belief is large and internally consistent, that is, if none of my beliefs contradict each other, my beliefs are true. A belief is false if it fails to cohere with the rest of my beliefs. In other words, truth is defined simply as logical coherence. The main problem with this view is that a set of beliefs held by fallible human beings may be coherent but false. So false. Yes, this is so true. Suppose all the evidence in a murder case indicates that the defendant is guilty, but the evidence has been rigged against the innocent person. Then the evidence is false precisely because it fails to hook up with reality. It's not because it fails to hook up with itself, because it's internally consistent. It must correspond to reality in order for it to be true. All right. Further, it is possible for two worldviews, each to be internally consistent logically and still contradict each other regarding core truth claims. Even if Islam and Christianity were both internally consistent, they could not both be true in essential beliefs, since Christianity is Trinitarian and incarnational, and Islam is not. Moreover, two contrasting but internally consistent scientific theories may describe and explain some phenomena in very different ways. Both geocentrism and heliocentrism may be formulated in logically consistent forms, yet both cannot be true. All right. Yes, this happens a lot. We generally form models based off of the data that we have obtained, and many people can construct different models, just like the models about how the universe is formed and things of that nature. There are a lot of models about how the universe is formed. They're not all true, even though many of them are internally consistent. Okay? They can't all be true. The one that is true is the one that best corresponds with reality. So Groothuis continues, worse yet, on the coherence theory, one may hold to the correspondence view of truth coherently. Therefore, the correspondence theory, a view that contradicts the coherence theory, would then be true. This indicates that something is badly amiss with the coherence account of a truth given the law of non-contradiction. Coherence or logical consistency cannot be what makes a truth claim true, although logical coherence is a necessary and negative test for truth. That is, if a worldview contains core beliefs that contradict each other, that worldview must be false. The logical test of coherence, however, concerns epistemology, theory of knowledge, not the nature of truth per se. All right? So this really is important, like justification. This is the part of the theory of knowledge he's talking about here. What kind of justifications do you have to believe that a proposition is true or a model is true? Things like that. And justifications are not only limited to internal consistency and things of that nature, but how it relates to the world. What is your evidence? Evidence is information or facts that you glean from reality. Okay? All right, so pragmatism, not a useful theory of truth. Pragmatic theories of truth have been advanced in somewhat different forms by American philosophers such as Charles Peirce, William James, and John Dewey. Richard Rorty, although considered a postmodernist to many, is an heir to the pragmatist legacy as well and has influenced at least one evangelical writer significantly. To simplify a bit, the general pragmatic understanding of truth is that a belief is true only if it produces desirable or beneficial effects in the long run. Something is true because it works in various ways found to be favorable. This theory of truth dispenses with considerations beyond some kind of utility. According to William James, a belief's cash value in experiential terms is all that counts. The pragmatic definitions of truth should not be confused with the means by which a claim may be verified or falsified by experience or evidence. The ways that truth is discovered or verified concerns epistemology. The pragmatic view of truth, however, is a metaphysical claim. It maintains that truth is what works, not that actual living demonstrates some things to be true and some things to be false. An epistemological claim. All right, so people often get confused with this. You can develop beliefs around and form beliefs around pragmatic considerations, okay? And that can affect how you behave and things of that nature, but it doesn't really impact knowledge. You can't really say that you know something based off of pragmatic considerations. You can just say that you believe it. You can even use pragmatic justifications to believe something in spite of plausible or convincing epistemic evidences. Okay. And you do this kind of stuff all the time, especially in like poker or chess. You have a body of epistemic evidences. Okay, such as like, how many cards are on the table if you're playing poker. You know what cards you have. You know what's on the river if the river has come up. And you use these epistemic evidences to form a belief about what your opponents may have in their hand, the cards that they have in their hand. And then you consider pragmatic justifications for particular beliefs. Like how much money am I going to lose here? How much money am I going to win here? And then you can form a belief. Okay, I believe that they have a weaker hand than me. Or you might even say there's enough epistemic justification to believe that person has a stronger hand than me. But I have a huge chip pile here. They don't have very many chips. I'm going to match their bet just in case. That pragmatic justification means that your behavior follows that belief. that there's sufficient warrant for believing that you could win the hand. The pragmatic outweighs the epistemic in that situation. All right, so like this obviously gets complicated, but you can't use pragmatic justifications for knowledge. You can use them for beliefs and for faith. Pragmatic justifications are heavily involved with faith. And remember, faith is belief in action. Okay? Even though you believe that, like in that poker scenario, even though you have epistemic justification and you believe on those grounds that your opponent has a stronger hand than you, but you believe in you have enough pragmatic justifications to believe that you could win, and you have the threats are not significant enough to dissuade you. You behave in a way that you could win. You can win. That's the belief. That's your faith. And so this stuff gets complicated, but we use it all the time. Even when you're taking a left turn, you have a knowledge about how fast the other people are going. And then pragmatically you judge what is the likelihood of, you getting broadsided and getting seriously injured. When I take a left turn out of a business or something, if I'm by myself, then I'm more willing to take riskier left turns. But if I have my 5-year-old daughter with me in the car, I am not willing to take the same kind of risks. Okay? That's where this becomes relevant. All right? And we're going to be talking about this more when we talk about Pascal's wager. Okay? All right, so Groothuis continues. Defining truth in terms of positive outcomes is untenable for several reasons. And Bertrand Russell, among others, provides some helpful reflections on the central claims of the pragmatic view of truth, particularly that of William James. These criticisms are apropos for the navigator of the contemporary postmodern intellectual landscape as well, since when a person drops the correspondence view of truth, pragmatic considerations loom large in the selection and maintenance of belief. According to Russell, James requires that a belief is deemed true when its effects are good, that is, when it works. If this idea is to be useful, which is only fitting given the pragmatist view of truth, we must know two things before we can know whether a belief is true. One, what is good? Two, what the effects of this or that belief must be. Okay, so these are truth claims. These are knowledge. All right, that must correspond with reality. All right. So, it is only after we have decided that the effects of a belief are good that we have a right to call it true. But this is deeply problematic. We must measure beliefs by usefulness, yet in many cases we just don't know ahead of time what the usefulness of a belief will be. Russell gives the example of believing that Columbus came to the New World in 1492. According to pragmatism, we cannot just look this up in a book. We have to determine what effects this belief will have on us. But how can we know this ahead of time? Added to this is the problem of knowing after the fact how beneficial our beliefs have been. Beliefs have consequences, no doubt, but determining just what the causal connection are between beliefs and effects and whether they are beneficial may be difficult in many cases. Yeah, we are not omniscient. We have enormous gaps in our knowledge, in our experience. We have this is all very difficult this model is untenable as a theory of how truth is. Okay. Groothuis continues. Russell gives an example. It is far easier, it seems to me, to settle the plain question of fact, have popes always been infallible, than to settle the question whether the effects of thinking of them infallible are on the whole good. Moreover, what does it mean for an idea to work? Arthur Lovejoy pointed out that James seems to confuse two senses of what this means. One view is that a theory is verified if it makes true predictions about events. There is nothing objectionable about that. Those who predicted that George W. Bush would win the 2004 presidential election were proved right when he was so elected. In that sense, their prediction worked by being factually verified, which, of course, presupposes the correspondence view of truth. But working could also mean simply that the effects of believing that Bush would be elected are deemed valuable to the individual. Certainly, optimism lifts the soul, but optimistic thoughts are either true or false in light of the facts, irrespective of how happy or fulfilled they may make someone feel. Russell disputes James's contention that the meaning of truth is simply its ability to produce desirable states of affairs. This ignores a common meaning of truth. Consider the difference between two statements. 1, other people exist. 2, it is useful to believe that other people exist. If James's view of truth were correct, 1 and 2 would have the same meaning. They would be synonymous. That is, they would express the same proposition since James defines truth as usefulness. But they clearly do not. Therefore, the meaning of truth cannot be a belief's usefulness, even though some beliefs are more useful or fruitful than others. Furthermore, a belief may work and not be true. A woman may believe she lost a large sum of money due to being disorganized. Taken aback as she reforms her life, it gets organized, and becomes a successful businesswoman. Later, however, she discovers that the money she thought she lost was in fact stolen by a roommate. Her belief that she lost the money was false, however fruitful the consequence of the false belief may have been. What makes a belief true, according to correspondence theory, is that it matches reality. So what makes it true that Columbus came to the New World in 1492? It is true because the event occurred in the 15th century. This historical fact is what makes my belief true. It is the truth maker. The effects of this belief are irrelevant to its truth value. But James claims that on pragmatic principles, if the hypothesis of God works satisfactorily in the widest sense of the word, it is true. In fact, James thought that various and conflicting religious beliefs could work and thus be true on the pragmatic theory. Those postmodern evangelicals who abandoned the correspondence view of truth often appeal to the meaningfulness of Christian community, its language, symbols, rites, traditions, and fellowship, instead of any apologetic method that might verify the objective truth of Christianity over against rival worldviews. These postmodernist evangelicals would have very little to say that would be persuasive to a member of another religious group, say a Mormon, who finds their group meaningful and true in a pragmatic sense. Russell's comments on this pragmatic conception of religion are on target. This simply omits as unimportant the question of whether God really is in his heaven. If he is a useful hypothesis, that is enough. God, the architect of the cosmos, is forgotten. All that is remembered is belief in God and its effects upon the creatures inhabiting our petty planet. No wonder the Pope condemned the pragmatic defense of religion. G.K. Chesterton compactly dispensed with pragmatism as a theory of truth by discerning an ironic contradiction within it. He observed that the pragmatists are correct in affirming that humans should attend to those truths that bear on their lives. There is an authoritative need to believe the things that are necessary to the human mind. But I say that one of those necessities precisely is a belief in objective truth. And this is even validated through the theory of evolution, if you take on the theory of evolution. A creature's ability to survive is very strongly related to its ability to detect how reality actually is. You know, like that instills survival benefit. Okay, to being able to make true judgments about reality. And I know that this view kind of undermines Alvin Plantinga's argument, his evolutionary argument against naturalism.
That conditional probability is low, fairly low, low, fairly low, relatively low, low, or at least not very high.
But it's still the case, you know, like being able to create true beliefs that correspond with reality instills survival benefits. All right. So Groothuis continues, while the pragmatist tells us to disregard anything absolute, the concept of absolute truth is most necessary to thought. Thus, the pragmatist, who confesses to have a humanly oriented and highly relevant philosophy, makes nonsense of the human sense of actual fact. In light of these objections, it should be evident that the pragmatic theory does not describe the nature of truth, nor can it slake the soul's deepest thirst for reality. However, if a belief is true to reality, it should produce effects in keeping with its promises. A true worldview should be livable. It should not commit us to perpetual intellectual and moral frustration. If it does, something is amiss. See Criterion 5b. All right, so remember, Criterion 5b, this criterion is part of a worldview evaluation, And it states that if a worldview leads habitually to a philosophical hypocrisy, it is rationally disqualified since this indicates that it does not correspond with reality. All right. So Groothuis continues, but this is one of several tests of truth in the area of epistemology. Pragmatic results do not determine the truth of a belief. Therefore, the pragmatic theory of truth is false and should be rejected by evangelicals and anyone else serious about matters of truth and falsity. Cosmic impiety. Any concept of truth that deems truth to be somehow dependent on our culture or our minds or wills makes truth into something that we, either collectively or individually, create and control. This is the case for all views of truth that abandon correspondence as the essence and meaning of truth. All right, so these kinds of views of truth are only effective in world building. You know, like when you're making a world, like if you're a writer, you know, like J.K. Rowling with the Harry Potter universe, or Stan Lee with the Spider-Man universe and things like that. You have that kind of control with regard to truth, whether or not Spider-Man can beat the Hulk and things like that. Like it becomes truth because it's a manifestation of your will, your intellect. But well, we're not talking about that kind of stuff here. I know there's a lot of debates online on whether or not Superman can beat Goku in a fight, you know, and you know, that kind of stuff is fun to watch, but it's kind of silly at the same time. But when we're talking about reality, we're more serious. We're being more serious now. Okay. So Groothuis continues, this is the case for all views of truth that abandon correspondence as the essence and meaning of truth. This disregard for reality encourages what Russell calls cosmic impiety, the concept of truth as something dependent upon facts largely outside human control, has been one of the ways in which philosophy hitherto has inculcated the necessary element of humility. When this check is removed, a further step is taken on the road towards a certain kind of madness, the intoxication with power. Russell is on to something deep and rich, a truth about truth and untruth. When people untether themselves from any responsibility to get reality right, to be true to the truth come what may, they forfeit the humility of being beholden to a reality outside themselves, a reality that may prove then right or wrong, but that they do not command. This is the thing about reality as well. When you hold false beliefs about reality, reality has a way of shaking you out of your stupor. You know, you're going to come headlong into reality at one point or another, and you're going to have to either change your beliefs or kind of devolve into a deeper madness. You know, like if you hold false beliefs about reality, then it can, in many situations, result in a decline of mental health. And you need to be careful about the kinds of beliefs that you hold. All right. Reality will correct you or bust. And the busting is going to be you. All right. So Groothuis continues, whether an atheist or a theist or anything else, cosmic piety means submission to the truth of the cosmos and whatever may be beyond it as well. Correspondence, vindicated and essential. Examined against the standard of the correspondence theory of truth, the postmodern, coherence, and pragmatic theories of truth clearly fall short. A culture may construct beliefs that grant it to meaning and significance. For example, the idea that if one perishes in an Islamic jihad, one goes directly to paradise. Yet those beliefs may be false in light of the facts. A set of beliefs may be internally coherent and not match reality. A set of beliefs may produce some good outcomes, at least in this life, and fail to connect with reality in important ways. We are then left with the reality of the truth that is intransigent and resistant to any coercion. Christians, of all people, must strongly affirm the notion that truth is what corresponds to reality, and must do so unswervingly, whatever the postmodern or other winds of doctrine may be blowing in our faces. And with that, we've reached the end of the chapter. All right, time to celebrate. Woohoo! Great job, everyone. If you made, yay, woohoo! And if you made it to the end of this chapter, good on you. Good on you. Good on you. Good job. I think that this is incredibly important. I hope that it came through in my reading and discussion of it. Truth is very important, especially since I believe that we worship a God of truth. So in order to understand reality more perfectly is to understand God more perfectly, because God is ultimate reality. Okay, so I hope that you take this knowledge and you meditate on it and see how it applies to you in your conversations with people and your study of the Bible and studying nature and things of that nature and things like that. So I'll see you next time for Chapter 6, Why Truth Matters Most. Thank you, and God bless.